it saddens Albertans to know that we're not treated the way we should be. And I think Albertans still aspirationally hope that we can create a better relationship with the rest of the country and be respected for what we have to offer. Albertans are so generous that we've always wanted to just be left alone. Let us do well, and then everybody does well. I'm really hoping that the rest of the country knows that Albertans really are strong and proud Canadians. We just have a government that hasn't been treating us well.
Hi, I'm Scott Hennig, President and CEO of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Welcome to Q&A. Today my guest is Danielle Smith, Premier of Alberta. Danielle has been a journalist, she's been a business advocate and owner. She's been opposition leader and now Premier of the province of Alberta. Thanks for joining me today.
My pleasure.
Well, I'm going to start off for some of those in our audience that don't know your history. Let's back up a little bit. Where'd you grow up? What'd you take in school? Where'd you study? What was that like?
Born and raised in Calgary. Went to university, got an English degree. Realized that qualified me to be a waitress, so went back to school for economics. I have a joint degree in English and economics, and then went on to the Fraser Institute as an intern. That really launched my career in public policy.
Well, that's a good footing for what you're doing now.
Mm-hmm.
But let's talk about your first political campaign. I know you got your political itch early on in life and ran for the school board here in Calgary. What was that very first campaign like, and what drew you to education?
Well, I would say that some of it was the circle I was hanging out in. I got involved in the political club's office at the University of Calgary, and what I loved about that period of time is that was when we had all of the political groups in one office, and so I had NDP friends and Liberal friends and Reform friends. I was a progressive conservative at that time, but through my Reform friendships, I had my first boyfriend, Sean McKinsley, who actually is a former alum of CTF as well, but he was working for a new politician at the time named Jason Kenney, and Jason Kenney's constituency assistant, Peggy Anderson, was very keen to try to bring some more free enterprise principles to how the school board operated, more associated with parental choice, with charter schools, with having accountability. That really appealed to me. So she and I ran as a team, and we shook the trees a little bit. The board was ultimately disbanded after 9 months, but it was a good political experience. I learned a lot about even though I have a great deal of comfort with conflict, but conflict isn't always the best way to solve problems. Trying to find common ground was probably my biggest lesson that I learned from that experience.
Oh, fair enough. I think we first met when you were actually with the Property Rights Institute.
That may have been.
Yeah, and then you were with the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. We worked on some campaigns together. Working with all the small businesses across this province, what was the main thing that you learned dealing with them and talking to those folks? One
of the things that I think is probably consistent is that governments like to have relationships with other large entities. Mm-hmm. So that's part of the reason why you often see policy written for very large corporations that have very large bureaucracies that are able to deal with very large bureaucracies, and oftentimes they also have very large unions that also have very large bureaucracies. So they all speak the same language. And one of the lenses that governments always should have is that there has to be some recognition that businesses under 50 people are the lion's share of our job creators. And you can't have the same kind of approach for a small business that you do for a company that has a full-time regulatory compliance department. So that's what I hope I can bring to government, is that I recognize that there's a sort of a streamlined approach to dealing large entity to large entity, but we always have to make sure that when we're bringing in new regulations or new tax policy, that we have that small guy in mind.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's very good. And a great organization too. You went on to be the first leader of the Wild Rose Party and then leader of the opposition. What were the early days like when you were just starting out as the leader of opposition?
I love being involved in startups. So the Canadian Property Rights Research Institute was also a bit of a startup. My former boss from the Fraser Institute, Michael Walker, he coined a term that I was a socio-political entrepreneur. So there is an entrepreneurial mindset you can bring to the nonprofit world as well. And I must say, the Wild Rose was a bit of a startup when I got there too. It didn't at the time have any elected members of office. It had very few memberships. It had a very small bank account. And through the process of the leadership, we were able to get enough excitement and energy that we won our first seat in a by-election, and then had a couple of other MLAs who were seating joining us so that we got official party status. And one success led to another. We started getting more media attention, having more profile in the legislature, able to move a number of issues along, and we were looking pretty good going into the 2012 election. Didn't quite go our way, but being able to go from an entity that was really on life support to being official opposition in the space of 2.5 years, I feel pretty proud about that.
So speaking of your time as opposition leader, what's one victory? I mean, often it's tough being in opposition, but you sometimes are able to shake loose some victories. What's one victory that you think still stands the test of time now?
It may surprise you. I mean, it's very hard to have a victory on anything in politics. There's a lot of difficulties in being able to move something when you're in an outside position. And I've seen that in lobbying and advocacy and also in opposition. But I would say that one of the things that I really began to appreciate is the role of the individual MLA. You can have a ton of successes every single day by taking a call and helping somebody who's having a difficult time getting an AISH payment or a difficult workers' compensation file. In my case, we had the devastating floods of 2013. Right. And one of the programs that was not working at all was the disaster recovery program. And so as an MLA, I was able to take that on. And it's interesting because we've just had another major calamity in our province with the fires. And I was able to meet some of the folks involved now in the disaster recovery program. And they said, you know, the work that you did helped us fix the program. And thank you. And, you know, no one will ever give a person credit for that, but at least I know. And then the other one as well was there's a lot of work that needs to be done on flood mitigation in a community to make sure that when you have a disaster like that it doesn't happen again. And I was watching in Calgary, because I was on radio, that how difficult it was to get all of the projects approved. I think Calgary is still only 30% protected from the last floods. But I was also able to work collaboratively with my mayor and the county to change the scope of our project for protection of High River, and now we're 100% protected. So I look at High River as being the safest community in all of Alberta, and those are two things that has really made me, anytime I talk to somebody about running for office, I say you have to want to do the work of an MLA. That is the most important work that you can do, and it's why I'm glad to be back again.
No, that's a really interesting point. Politically, how would you describe yourself? I mean, there's different types of conservatives. What type are you?
I've described myself as a libertarian conservative, and no one knows what that means.
Why don't you define it then for us?
Well, I always thought it was sort of natural to think of libertarian. Root word of that is liberty. So I believe in freedom on both sides. I believe in personal freedom, civil liberties, but I also believe in economic freedom and free enterprise. And so that's why it's complicated when you talk about how do those my aspirations and desire to support freedom and individual rights when you have to make collective decisions in government, whether it's at the municipal level, the provincial level, or the federal level. That's always been the challenge, because I'm so attracted to public policy, so attracted to figuring out how to move things through government, but you always have to make sure that you're doing it in a way that gives maximum deference to the individual, to the family, to the community, to the individual business, and really is a measure of partnering with those entities in a way that can support them, but also be the measure of last resort when things fail.
So coming to that conclusion that you were a libertarian conservative, who were some of the authors or individuals that influenced you as you were forming your political identity?
I can say probably one of the first, when I started thinking about philosophy, was Ayn Rand and John Locke, both at the same time. I was reading both of them. And John Locke talked about life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, or life, liberty, and property, as being the foundation of what the role of government is to protect those things. And Ayn Rand took that to a different level. She's a little cruel. She's not a very altruistic person. And so that got tempered by some of the other reading that I did when I went to the Fraser Institute. Having finished an economics degree, I was gravely disappointed that we didn't learn about the Austrian economists there. And so that's when I got introduced to Friedrich Hayek, his concept of spontaneous order is one that I just see it in action all the time, whether it's in the public sector or the private sector. and just Schumpeter as well. The whole notion of creative destruction. It's a very difficult thing to see legacy businesses go under. But when those legacy businesses go under, it's because it's some scrappy startup who can figure out a way to use resources better. And so when I look at those influencers on my thinking, I'm trying to figure out how can we bring a little bit of that creativity, innovation, internal markets, competition choice, customer-focused approach to the services of government. So I would say that the kind of education that I had along those lines is very influential on the way I approach government. I don't believe that central planning is the right answer. I don't believe that the job of us is to find smarter central planners. When you have a complex entity like a provincial government, which has essentially 27 departments, most of them billion-dollar departments. There's no one person who has the scope to be able to manage a $70 billion enterprise like that. What you have to do is create the avenue that you can have 1,000 decision makers, so that every single day you get 1,000 incremental choices that keep on moving you towards better and better outcomes. So that's how I think how my political philosophy is being played out in this new role that I have. Is part of the reason why I've given my ministers mandate letters and just said, go and execute on this. And if you have any trouble, let me know. And they don't call me that often. I just
good.
They're able to get a lot done, and I think that's important. I think it'll allow us to be very effective as a government.
No, that's very good. So after spending some time in public life, you went back and you were a radio host, a business advocate again, but you then re-entered the political fray, running for the leadership of the United Conservative Party. Was there a moment or some sort of event that just set you over the edge and said, okay, that's it, I'm back in, I'm going to do this? And if so, what was it?
Well, I'll blame Derek Fildebrand, because I was at the...
We blame him for a lot of things. So.
I know, and he's also a former CTF
yes,
alum,
yeah.
isn't he? No, I was on a panel at the AGM for I guess what year would that have been? Probably 2021 must have been. Trying to get my years straight here
right,
when
yeah,
everything
right.
unfolded, 2021.
Okay.
And we were talking about what might happen with the leadership, because there was some troubles at that time. And I made some comment, well, if the job came open, sure, I'd run again. But so would so-and-so, and so-and-so, and so. I listed about 10 different people. And that became sort of a blaring headline that I had launched my leadership campaign. Wasn't quite how I intended it, but those kind of things have their way of creating their own momentum. And when I know that there was groups that were organizing to get the outcome that happened, and when the previous premier decided that he didn't have a strong enough mandate and stepped down, I'd kind of already locked myself in.
Right.
Because I'd said if the job came open, I'd run for it. And part of it was that I was really concerned about what happens when you split the conservative movement. I mean, I played a role in splitting the conservative movement in the past, and I've watched what happened at the federal level with the conservative movement split. And it is always so hard to stitch it back together. And I give Brian Jean and Jason Kenney great credit for doing that. And I just didn't want to be part of a group that would have caused that divide to happen again. I felt like, I don't know if I can win, but I know at least I can keep the people who do support me staying in the fold, and knowing that the United Conservative Party is a vehicle that is worth supporting, and it's a project that is worth backing. So that's the reason why I decided to run again. Is I felt gravely concerned that we were at a point now with the consolidated left under the NDP that if the Conservative movement split, there was no way we'd win re-election.
Right. So you ran that leadership race, obviously you won and became premier, but was there, same sort of question, was there a moment in time or an event or something along the line that sort of said, okay, I'm going to win this, I'm going to be the premier? Was that happen to you, or did you wait till the final vote?
The moment that I knew that we had won was when we got down to the third ballot, and it was me and Minister Taves and Brian Jean on the ballot in that order. I thought, okay, I think I've got enough support from Brian Jean supporters that this would take me over the top. But it was a nail biter all the way through to the end.
Yeah, fair enough. So now, after being premier, one of the first things you did was eliminate Alberta's fuel tax. That was a big move, obviously one that we're much in favor of. You're also an advocate for eliminating the federal carbon tax, yet we see Justin Trudeau continue to push the federal carbon tax and not only do that, but continue to increase it every year. Why do you think that he is continuing to push that tax up, despite the fact that we're seeing people crying about high costs of living?
It goes against all reason, really. I mean, I think that there have been even some academics on our side, like Ross McKittrick, who's talked about what kind of carbon tax might result in enough behavior change. And it is well below what the current level of carbon tax is. And the notion that it's going to continue going to $170 per ton, we're already, I believe, at a point where the carbon tax on home heating is higher than the actual cost of the natural gas that you're using. And so when I look at the knock-on effect as well of the impact it's having on our power grid, because our electricity is mostly natural gas as well, when we get into the deep winter when it's minus 30, or the heat of summer when it's plus 30, and people need to turn on their air conditioning in their furnaces, it's causing real hardship for people. So I don't know how the federal government can continue to be so disconnected from that. We're supportive of sort of an industrial pricing program, which we've had in this province since 2007, because that's where you're going to make the major changes, is when the large industrial operations are able to find ways to capture CO2 and store it, or capture it and turn it into useful products, like Heidelberg is doing with their net zero cement facility, or the time or the investment that Cenovus wants to make potentially in small modular nuclear to be able to decarbonize, or direct air capture, which is being pioneered with Avatar Innovations. Those things are I think going to be what causes, if your number one concern is how do we reduce emissions, those are the kind of things that are going to work, in addition to LNG export. One of the things that I keep hearing every time I go to an international conference is how concerned the poorer nations of the world are about energy poverty, and that if we do not do our part in making sure that they've got a secure supply of LNG, they're just going to continue to accelerate their coal plant development, which will just continue to accelerate emissions. So I would say that the federal government has lost the plot. It's not about punishing a fixed income senior in January and making them choose between having a lower grocery bill or being able to stay warm. It's about making sure that we're holding the large companies that are able to make progress. Let's do what we can to support them in moving down that track. That's the message that we've been giving to the federal government. Let's get rid of the retail carbon tax, stop punishing consumers, and let's just work on how we can use technology, innovation, and export in order to be able to achieve national and international goals.
Well, I'm not sure. You won't be surprised for me to say that I'm totally agree, and I'm not sure why they aren't listening. So.
But you're seeing the result of it. I mean, what I don't understand is why they don't connect the fact that they plummeted in the polls with how concerned people are about the affordability crisis. A lot of that centering around just the basic goods that we have to pay for, including food. And they've lost a lot of ground with young people, because young people want to be able to still enjoy paying for a decent price for rent and being able to afford their utility bills, as well as being able to afford groceries. And some of the TikTok videos that are circulating, they're pretty heartbreaking when people are losing heart in the potential for a good quality of life in Canada. And that's on the federal government, and they should own that. Yeah,
you think a government that governs by polls like they do is strangely ideological on this.
Well, we're trying to get them to be realistic. We're injecting reality every chance that we get. We're in the process of trying to figure out a pathway where we can align our interests to 2050, which I think is a reasonable time frame. We're not there yet, but we're still going to work on it.
Oh, good for you. Talking about a long-term plan, you mentioned during your leadership race when we were chatting about an old study the CTF did 20-some years ago, looking at building up the Heritage Fund in this province, using the investment income every year to replace the income taxes. One that that's what attracted me to the CTF initially. I know that's maybe a long-term plan, but do you think there's still an achievable goal there that Albertans could look towards?
I wish I could pull out that old column. Everybody pulls up all the old columns that are controversial. No one ever pulled out my old column where I was celebrating the CTF plan, because I'm trying to remember what the numbers were at the time. But I can tell you what I know now based on what we've seen is that Minister Travis Toews said if we had just invested the investment income from the Heritage Savings Trust Fund from the beginning, that fund would be well over $100 billion right now. And that to me is very compelling. So what's the saying? The best time to have started would have been 30 years ago. The next best time is now.
Right.
And so one of the things I was so pleased to work with him on was the fiscal framework that we put in place. It's going to be very powerful, and I don't know if people realize just how powerful it's going to be. We've committed to limiting year-over-year increases to inflation plus population growth from the previous year. That was one thing that was really important, because oftentimes you'll see these projections about what inflation and population growth is going to be. They're always wrong, and then you end up overspending 2 or 3 or 4 percentage points. So we'll be basing our year-over-year spending growth on actuals, which means that our revenue should always be outpacing our expenses. That's going to be important because that will create an avenue for surpluses. We're also keeping all of the investment income from the Heritage Savings Fund, Trust Fund, in the fund. And so it's going to be able to grow and compound over time. And the finance minister surprised me by adding an extra $2 billion just to top it up, because we had such a large surplus last year. So we have a new model that when we have surpluses, half has to go to debt repayment, and then the rest can go to either more debt repayment, savings in the Heritage Savings Trust Fund, or one-time spending that doesn't increase operations. And I think that that'll stand the test of time. That I can't wait to see a couple of terms out where we find ourselves. But I have it in my own line of sight that I'd love to see it get to $50 billion by 2030, and then be well on its way to getting to $100 billion, because that allows us then to wean ourselves off our reliance on resource revenue. I think resource revenues are going to be a central feature of our economy and our budget for a long time. But why not plan for a future where if for some reason we aren't able to enjoy the same amount of revenues, it can be replaced with investment income. That's where we're headed.
I gotta tell you, I beat my head against the wall arguing for this, 15 years ago when I was the Alberta director, and when I saw this year's budget, I was overjoyed to see that in there.
Look at the influence you have.
Oh, I don't think I had any influence on it, or I would have had it 15 years ago.
Took us both a long time to get there, I can tell you, but you and I have been in sync on that for a long time.
That's good. Let's talk about the Alberta pension plan idea. It's been in the news a lot here lately. What's the best argument in favor of Alberta moving to their own pension plan, and what's the biggest argument against doing it?
Well, I would say one of the things that people should take away is just how much Alberta contributes to the wealth of the entire country. The fact that if we were to get by formula what we're entitled to under legislation, that we'd be entitled to 53% of the benefit based on our overpayment of premiums and the compound interest. People should be asking themselves, is that fair? Is that fair that Alberta, with 4.5 million people, continues to underwrite every single federal program is structured this way, where we pay more in and we get back less than we pay in? It's not sustainable, especially when you have a federal government that continues to attack us, continues to talk about emissions caps on oil and gas, emissions cap on fertilizers, emissions cap on methane, carbon taxes that are going up unsustainably, on talking about regulating the number of combustion engine vehicles we're allowed to sell, regulating whether or not homes are allowed to be hooked up to natural gas. The hits just keep on coming on our industry, and they keep on asking us to pay. So Alberta did a referendum on equalization. We said we want to renegotiate this relationship that we have with the rest of the country. And they shut the door in our face. So we had to look at, well, what's another way to keep some of those dollars here? And the Alberta pension plan, we have the right under the Constitution to have our own plan. Under statute, there's a formula there for how we would exit. And now it's going to be up to Albertans to decide. When I was running in the leadership with Travis Taves, he was very committed to this. And I thought, wow, I wonder what he knows that I don't know. Right. Well, now everybody knows. Everybody knows that if we got the $334 billion we're entitled to, that would allow us to reduce our premiums on employees by $1,425 and employers by $1,425 for a total of $2,850. Or we'd be able to increase the benefits for our citizenry. And we'd also be able to create, as Jim Dinning, who's leading the panel for doing the review, has said, we'd be able to create an ecosystem here that would be able to support a large amount of additional investment dollars coming into Alberta. So there's a lot of great reasons why we should pursue it. Now, why shouldn't we?
Yeah, why shouldn't we? Yeah.
I think the emotional argument would be that Albertans love Canada and Albertans want to be a constructive part of Canada. And I think it saddens Albertans to know that we're not treated the way we should be. And I think Albertans still aspirationally hope that we can create a better relationship with the rest of the country and be respected for what we have to offer. Albertans are so generous that we've always wanted to just be left alone. Let us do well, and then everybody does well. And so I hope, so I've got a parallel track that I think is responsible for people to know just how much they can benefit if we go to a pension plan. But I'm really hoping that the rest of the country knows that Albertans really are strong and proud Canadians. We just have a government that hasn't been treating us well.
So you're doing some feedback now, going to do a referendum, if it's positive?
I'll get that advice from Jim Dinning and his panel, which includes Moignania and Mary Ritchie. Mary Ritchie was on the CPPIB investment board, and Moignania was part of the original panel who came up with the Alberta strategy. I would say I'll take their advice. I mean, it'll be pretty clear by the time we get to May whether or not people want to have a vote on this. And if they don't want to have a vote on it, we won't. And if they do want to have a vote on it, we will. And I will respect the outcome.
Okay, I know we're running short of time here, so let me just give a couple last quick hit questions just to get to know Danielle Smith. Very light, easy questions. What's your all-time favorite book?
All-time favorite book? I'm trying to, every few years I read Atlas Shrugged, but I actually prefer her other book, We the Living.
Oh. Yeah. Yes, that's the correct answer, actually. It's such a great book. All-time favorite movie?
All-time favorite movie, a little bit more frivolous. There's a few of them. Like I like Scrooged, and I like French Kiss, and I like
French Kiss. What's that one?
Groundhog Day. Oh, with Meg Ryan.
Oh,
who doesn't love Meg Ryan?
Well.
She's got a new movie out. So I can hardly wait to see it with David Duchovny. I can't wait to see it.
Okay. Okay. Any podcast recommendations? What are you listening to?
Well, let me give a couple of suggestions. So Sean Newman is kind of Alberta's Joe Rogan, and I did a number of podcasts with him in my former life, and so I do enjoy that long-form interview style, and because he deals with Canadian issues, I think, and also he's a sports guy, so he also has some really interesting sports guests on too, so I would recommend him. But Bruce McAllister, who used to be on Global, he's now launched an Alberta podcast because, of course, with the federal government making all of these changes and Facebook and Google not offering Canadian news, we feel that we've got to be able to get our message out. So we've got an Alberta podcast that you can follow on my YouTube site.
Okay, that is a shameless plug. That's good.
Very shameless.
What app on your phone gets the most use?
I still want to call it Twitter, but X.
Oh, okay.
And then secondarily, iMessage. That's the best way to reach me. People email me, but I've got hundreds, if not thousands of emails, but I always monitor my texts.
Okay, last question. What was the first concert you ever went to?
Duran Duran!
Oh
Yeah.
That's a good one.
And I think it was the last one I went to, too. And I'll go again when they come again. I was a Simon Le Bon fan.
Oh, there you go. Thanks so much for joining me, Danielle. This has been a lot of fun.
My pleasure. Thanks so much, Scott.